You are unfit, Miss Brooks. Unfit, unstable, and unworthy of these children. The gavel came down like a gunshot through the sterile wood-paneled courtroom of Fulton County. Nia Brooks, clutching a creased manila folder to her chest, felt the air leave her lungs. But, Your Honor, I have the documents. Steady work, a new apartment. It's all right here. Judge Harrison Vance didn't even glance at the papers. With a sweep of his hand, he tore the custody petition in half. Bailiff, remove her. He thought he had merely silenced an annoyance. He didn't know he had just lit a fire that would burn for 20 years. A fire one of the boys he took from her would one day use to burn his empire down. Atlanta, summer of 2006. For 24-year-old Nia Brooks, mother of two, the heat matched the fear in her chest. She stood before the Fulton County Courthouse in her best dress, clutching a folder like a life vest. Pay stubs from her double shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital. A signed lease on a safer apartment. Glowing letters from her pastor and her son's teachers. Her sons, 5-year-old Malik and 3-year-old Tariq, were in the temporary care of her sister Chenice, who'd taken them in when a violent ex-partner, an eviction, and a brief spell of depression had drawn the attention of Child Protective Services. It was only supposed to be temporary, 6 months to get back on her feet. Nia had done it in 4, clawing her way back, driven by the desperate need to hold her boys again. Today was the day she'd prove it. Judge Harrison Vance ran Family Courtroom 3B with the casual arrogance of a man born into generational wealth and country club handshakes. A man to whom the people before him were rarely human. Just case numbers and nuisances between him and his tea hour at the Piedmont Driving Club. When he looked at Nia, he didn't see a mother who'd fought a war for her children. He saw a young black woman from a zip code he associated with crime and decay. He saw a stereotype, and he had long since stopped bothering to look past it. Her overworked court-appointed attorney laid out the facts. Stable housing, steady employment, completed counseling. Vance barely looked up. The file shows a history of instability, he said, smooth and cold. That's the past, Your Honor. Nia broke in, voice shaking but her gaze steady. I have the proof right here. I've changed everything. I will not tolerate outbursts in my courtroom. He struck the gavel. This court is not convinced a return to your custody serves the children's best interests. Please, just look at the papers, Nia begged, stepping toward the bench. Vance's face hardened into contempt. He took the folder from the bailiff, didn't open it, didn't glance at the teacher's letters or the pay stubs, and with deliberate, agonizing slowness, tore the whole stack in half. The sound of ripping paper filled the silent courtroom like the sound of Nia's heart tearing. Petition denied, he said flatly, dropping the halves into his wastebasket. Custody remains with the state. The mother is deemed unfit. Clear the courtroom. Nia's knees gave out. She hit the floor screaming, raw and guttural. My babies! You can't take my babies from me! Chenice rushed from the gallery to hold her as bailiffs dragged them both toward the doors. Nia's last glimpse of the room was of Vance, already absorbed in the next file, entirely untouched by the life he'd just destroyed. He hadn't just denied a petition. He'd torn apart a promise, a family, a mother's soul. What followed was a slow unraveling. The state's temporary foster arrangement was only ever meant to be a bridge, but once Nia had been declared unfit, the machinery of the child welfare system ground into permanent motion. Chenice spent her own modest savings hiring a lawyer and fighting for kinship custody, but Vance, wielding his power with something close to malice, denied her too, citing a decade-old bounced check, long since settled, as proof of poor moral character. It was a flimsy pretext and a blatant abuse of discretion. But in his courtroom his word was the final verdict. He's punishing us, Chenice whispered one night in Nia's empty apartment. The silence in rooms meant for children's laughter deafening around them. He looked at us, saw where we came from, and decided we didn't deserve them. Nia became a shadow of herself, working double shifts, staring at walls at night, haunted by the sound of tearing paper. The boys suffered most. Malik at 5 remembered his mother's promise. Mama's coming back, baby, I promise. And carried it like a stone. Then came the final blow. With no families willing to take siblings, the state split the boys up. Tariq, young and adaptable, went to an older couple in the suburbs. Malik, older and visibly traumatized, was labeled difficult and shuffled between group homes, carrying the broken edges of his family with him. In one such home in Decatur, 7-year-old Malik sat clutching a photo of his mother hidden in his sock. A social worker, Mrs. Higgins, tried gently to explain why he couldn't go home. A judge had to make a hard decision, she said. Which judge? Malik whispered. Judge Vance, she said, not registering the weight of what she'd just handed him. He decided it was best. The name settled into Malik like a seed in fertile soil. He didn't understand the legal machinery yet. He only understood that a man named Judge Vance had taken his mother, his brother, and his home. Years passed. Malik grew tall, quiet, and relentlessly focused. The rage that had once shown up as tantrums crystallized into something cold and precise. He excelled in school, driven by one need: to understand the system that had destroyed his family. He read law at the library, tracked down what records he could, and found the name again. The Honorable Harrison Vance, Superior Court of Fulton County. While Tariq grew up comfortable but distant in the suburbs, eventually losing the memory of his early years, Malik held the past in an iron grip. At 16 he sought out Shanice, who wept at the sight of him and filled in the gaps: the petition, the apartment, the job, and the torn-up papers. "He didn't even look at them," she said. "He tore your mother's life apart right in front of her." Malik didn't shout, he didn't cry. He only nodded. "I know, and I'm going to make sure he pays for every single sheet of paper." Revenge, Malik learned, wasn't a wild beast, it was a glacier. Slow, silent, and crushing. At Georgia State's law school, in the pulsing heart of downtown Atlanta, he was already a weapon in training. No fraternity parties, no networking at cocktail hours, no dream of a house in Buckhead. He was there for one purpose: to learn how to take a god apart, brick by legal brick. He was a phantom in the lecture halls, rarely speaking unless called on, but his exam scores were legendary, almost intimidating. He didn't just read the law, he dissected it like a medical examiner searching for cause of death, working through case law, procedural loopholes, and the often corrupt political entanglements inside Fulton County's justice system. He studied Vance's career, now risen to chief judge of the Superior Court, silver-haired, his image carefully polished by expensive PR firms, his power absolute, the way a religious scholar studies scripture, memorizing his rulings, cross-referencing his campaign donors against corporate registries, tracking even his weekend golf partners. Vance was a king in a black robe, untouchable and calm in his corruption, and Malik intended to learn every seam in his armor before he ever showed his face. One rainy evening in his second year, Malik visited his mother in her small subsidized apartment in the West End. The vibrant woman who once marched into that courtroom was gone. Years of double shifts, crippling depression, and grief over her lost sons had left her hollowed out, suffering severe diabetic neuropathy, spending her days in a worn recliner behind closed blinds. "Look at my handsome lawyer," she rasped, touching the lapel of the tailored suit he'd bought with maxed-out loans and paralegal night shifts, armor he needed to move undetected in Vance's world. "Not a lawyer yet, Mama. Soon." He held her impossibly thin hands, rage burning in his chest. Vance had done this to her, as surely as if he'd broken her bones himself. "You work too hard, baby," she murmured. "Give me some grandbabies. I have work to finish, Mama." He never told her the truth, that he was hunting the most powerful judge in the county, and that knowing it might kill her. "I'm going to make sure no one is ever hurt the way we were." Walking to his car, he took the call confirming his internship at the Fulton County DA's office. He was in. The wolf had entered the pasture in perfectly tailored sheep's clothing. 2 years later, having graduated top of his class, Malik was a rising star in the DA's office, an assistant district attorney known for his icy demeanor, his photographic memory, and his ruthless efficiency in the courtroom. Defense attorneys feared facing him. He never raised his voice, but dismantled their arguments with clinical, devastating precision. Colleagues whispered about him at the water cooler. He was a machine with no visible personal life, wholly consumed by the law. What no one knew was that every late night and weekend was devoted to Operation Vance. He volunteered for the tedious work ambitious prosecutors avoided like the plague: appellate reviews, post-conviction motions, mind-numbing audits of juvenile court placements, mundane, unglamorous work that nonetheless handed him the ultimate master key: unrestricted, unquestioned access to the historical records of Family Courtroom 3B. He built data models of 15 years of Vance's rulings. The pattern first looked like ordinary systemic bias: maximum sentences for minority youth, denied custody restorations for low-income parents, all branded as tough on crime. But Malik knew men like Vance. Arrogance always bred greed, and power alone was never enough. It had to be profitable. At 2 in the morning on a quiet Thursday, cross-referencing placement files against state funding, he found it. Over 10 years, 78% of the children Vance sentenced or removed from their homes were funneled to one specific facility, Pine Ridge Youth Academy, a private, barbed wire detention center, billing the state thousands per child per month for maximum intervention. Malik traced Pine Ridge's ownership through a Delaware holding company, Apex Corrections LLC, spending 3 sleepless days peeling back shell companies and offshore accounts until he hit rotten bedrock. A consulting firm, Blue Ridge Advisory, paid $25 a month for administrative consulting. Its registered agent was Arthur Vance, Harrison Vance's brother. It wasn't just racism, it wasn't just classism. It was the industrial monetization of human misery. Vance tore families apart, falsified the severity of children's needs, and fed them into a private prison pipeline, collecting a laundered cut through his brother's shell company every time. He had sold children. He had sold Malik. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had motive. He had a paper trail. But paper trails could be buried. To bring down a chief judge, he needed a witness, someone who could tie the abuse at Pine Ridge directly to the evaluations ordered from Vance's bench. Finding one was like finding a man willing to stand in front of a firing squad. Vance was Atlanta's legal apex predator, and speaking against him meant career death. Malik needed an outsider the machine had already chewed up. He found Elias Thorne, a disbarred public defender nursing black coffee and defeat in a grimy Smyrna diner, 10 years aged past his 50, ruined 5 years earlier over misplaced evidence in one of Vance's trials. "I don't talk to the DA's office," Elias growled without looking up. "I'm not here on official business," Malik said quietly. "I'm here about Harrison Vance." Elias flinched at the name, then looked up, wary of Malik's polish. "You're a fool, kid. Vance owns the board. You're a pawn who doesn't know he's already been sacrificed." "I know about Pine Ridge," Malik said, tapping the folder. "The financial links to Vance's brother, the transfers to Blue Ridge. I know he got kickbacks for every child he sent there to be broken." Elias laughed bitterly. Plausible deniability would save Vance, he warned, and destroy Malik instead. But Malik pressed. "How did the pipeline actually work?" "It was well-oiled," Elias said. "Vance had a psych evaluator in his pocket. My cousin, Dr. Aris Thorne. Vance ordered evaluations for the kids he targeted. Aris gave them fabricated diagnoses of severe violent disorders and recommended high-security placement. Pine Ridge was conveniently the only facility equipped for it. The state paid. Pine Ridge got rich. Vance got his cut. Will he testify?" "He's dead," Elias said flatly. "Overdosed 2 years ago. The guilt ate him alive. I tried to sound the alarm with his files. 3 weeks later, heroin turned up in my desk drawer. I lost my license. Vance destroyed my life without blinking." Malik felt cold satisfaction. Vance's hubris was his weakness. He'd assumed none of his victims would ever rise. "I don't need your cousin," Malik said, standing. "I needed the mechanism. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. You'll get your license back. I guarantee it." He still needed a living witness, someone falsely diagnosed and sent to Pine Ridge by Vance himself. That night, scrolling sealed juvenile records in his car, rain drumming on the roof, his finger froze on page 42. A name he hadn't spoken in a decade. Tariq Miller. Former name, Tariq Brooks. The file read like a horror story. The adoptive couple had been unprepared for the trauma of a toddler ripped from his mother and brother. By 14, unprocessed rage and petty theft had led them to surrender him back to the state. He landed exactly where he'd started. Juvenile court, Judge Vance presiding, Dr. Thorne evaluating, placement, Pine Ridge, 4 years. Vance hadn't just destroyed Malik's childhood and taken their mother. He'd devoured Tariq too, and profited from him twice. Malik gripped the wheel until his knuckles cracked, tears blurring the screen. It took 2 days to track Tariq down. 23 now, working as a mechanic in a grease-stained shop in Marietta. Malik found him under the hood of a rusted truck, a jagged scar through one eyebrow, the same defiant set of shoulders as their absent father. "Tariq!" Malik called over the compressor's roar. Tariq turned, eyes hardened by survival, and didn't recognize the man in the suit. "Who's asking?" "I paid my probation fees. I don't want trouble." "It's me, Malik. I'm your brother." Tariq froze, the rag falling from his hand. For a long moment neither moved, 20 years suddenly between them. Then he laughed harshly and stepped back. "My brother's a memory. You look like a cop. Get out of my shop." "I'm a prosecutor," Malik said, closing the distance. "I know what happened to you. I know about Pine Ridge." At the name, Tariq's face cracked, raw fear quickly masked by cornered aggression. He grabbed a wrench. "Don't ever say that name to me again. You don't know what they did. I know Vance sent you there. I know he got paid for every beating you took. I'm going to destroy him, Tariq. But I need you to testify about what happened inside. Tariq laughed bitterly. They beat kids to death in there and called it accidents. Locked us in the dark for weeks. The warden, Garris, bragged the judges were his business partners. You think testimony touches a man like that? He owns the city. He doesn't own me, Malik said. He tore up Mama's papers. He took you from me and sold you off for garbage. Mama's dying in a tiny apartment believing you had a good life. Help me burn his empire down. Tariq really looked at him then, past the suit, into the same cold rage burning in his own chest. Slowly he lowered the wrench, then pulled out a battered, oil-stained ledger of his own memory. Warden Garris didn't trust computers. He kept real books, kickbacks, false diagnoses, payments to Blue Ridge, hidden under the floorboards of his office. Get that ledger, and you'll have Vance. The last piece had clicked into place. Malik was a lawyer, not a burglar. A break-in would taint the evidence. Instead, he took Tariq's sworn statement, combined it with the financial trail, and brought it straight to the FBI's Atlanta Anti-Corruption Unit, bypassing the local DA entirely. Special Agent Reynolds's jaw hardened at the scale of the laundering. Within 48 hours, a federal judge signed a sealed, no-notice warrant for Pine Ridge. The raid came under cover of a moonless Tuesday night. Malik rode along in a Kevlar vest, strapped over his shirt. Tariq sat beside him, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the barbed wire fences that had once been his entire world, insisting on coming along as a guide to the facility's hidden corners. At exactly 3 in the morning, Pine Ridge's gates were breached. Dozens of heavily armed FBI agents stormed the grounds, flashlights slicing the oppressive dark, sirens tearing through the rural silence. Inside, the smell of floor wax and stale cabbage hit Tariq like a physical blow, threatening to drag him back into the pit of his childhood. But Malik's hand on his shoulder held him steady. In the warden's office, Garris, thick-necked and sweating in an undershirt, was caught feeding documents into an industrial shredder and cuffed against the wall before he could make a sound. Tariq walked past him without a glance, shoved aside a heavy oak bookshelf, dropped to his knees and pried up a section of the floor with a borrowed tactical bar. Beneath it lay a thick, leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with a decade of sins, names, fabricated diagnoses signed by Dr. Thorne, and dollar amounts flowing straight to Blue Ridge Advisory. We've got him, Reynolds murmured. No, Malik corrected, colder than the night air. Now we set the trap for him. Facing 30 years, Garris flipped on Vance within 2 hours, confirming every entry in the ledger. Meanwhile, Malik quietly built a 400-page RICO indictment, leaving no loophole, no deniability, no chance of bail. The trap sprang on a crisp Thursday morning. Vance sat high on his bench, silver hair perfectly groomed, black robe radiating absolute authority, mid-sentencing on a minor drug charge, leaning into the microphone to deliver one of his typically hypocritical lectures on personal responsibility, in the exact same tone he'd used on Nia 20 years before. When the courtroom's heavy oak doors slammed open, the gallery's murmur died instantly as 6 FBI agents in dark windbreakers marched down the center aisle, flanking a special agent, with Assistant DA Malik Brooks walking directly in front, carrying a thick sealed folder. What is the meaning of this? Vance demanded, gavel raised, face red. I'll have you held in contempt. I don't think so, Your Honor. Malik stopped before the bench, no longer the frightened 5-year-old. An executioner now, aged Reynolds stepped forward. Harrison Vance, you're under arrest for violations of the RICO Act, conspiracy to commit mail fraud, money laundering, and trafficking. The room gasped. Vance's face drained of color. This is an outrage. I am the chief judge of this district. They're not baseless. Harrison, Malik said, dropping a photocopy of the ledger onto the evidence stand with a crack like a gunshot. We have the Pine Ridge ledger, Garris's confession, the offshore accounts traced to your brother. Vance stared at the pages, hubris finally cracking into horror. Why? Who are you? Malik stepped closer, and the courtroom held its breath. 20 years ago, a young mother stood in a courtroom just like this one. She brought you proof of her job, a lease on a safe home. She begged you to look at her papers so she could get her 2 boys back. Recognition began to dawn in Vance's eyes. You called her unfit. You never even opened the folder. You tore her papers in 2. You tore my family in 2. Malik's voice rose, filling the room. You separated me from my brother Tariq and threw him into Pine Ridge for a $25,000 kickback. His voice became a roar. My name is Malik Brooks, and this hearing is adjourned. Vance slumped as agents hauled him to his feet, and the cuffs closed around his wrists. the sweetest sound Malik had ever heard. The king had been dragged from his throne. The trial became a national sensation. The Kids for Cash scandal tore through Georgia's justice system. Elias Thorne testified. Garris testified. Tariq took the stand, upright and unbroken, and described the horrors of Pine Ridge. Vance's expensive lawyers stood powerless against the mountain of evidence. The federal jury convicted him on all 42 counts in under 4 hours. A federal sentencing judge, showing zero tolerance for public corruption, gave him 30 years without parole. He would die behind bars. That evening, as the brutal Atlanta heat broke into a cool, gentle breeze, Malik and Tariq walked shoulder to shoulder up the concrete steps to Nia's apartment in the West End. She sat in her worn recliner watching the evening news, the volume too low, blinds still drawn against habit. The headline scrolling across the screen read, "Disgraced Chief Judge gets 30 years." Malik walked over and gently muted the television. Nia looked up, her clouded eyes widening as she saw not one but 2 large silhouettes filling her living room. Tariq stepped forward first, tears running down his scarred face, and sank to his knees beside her chair. "Hi, Mama," he choked out, burying his face in her lap. Nia let out a breathless, trembling sob. Her shaking hands reached into Tariq's hair, then stretched out to pull Malik down beside them too. The 3 of them clung together, a tangled knot of weeping, healing, and love the system had tried for 20 years to grind into dust, and never quite managed to. Over his mother's shoulder, Malik watched Vance being led away in chains. The ledger was closed, the debt was paid. Justice had finally come. Karma keeps no deadline, and the truth always finds its way to light. Judge Vance thought he could play God with vulnerable lives, tearing a mother from her children just to line his pockets, forgetting one rule. You never know what the child you break today will become tomorrow. Malik Brooks turned his trauma into a weapon, mastered the very system that destroyed his family, and used the law to bring the hammer down on a corrupt empire.